You ever finish a brilliant book, feeling totally inspired, only to realize a week later you can barely remember the key ideas? It's super frustrating, and it happens to almost everyone. Well, today, we're diving into a system designed to fix that. One that'll help you transform from just a passive reader into someone who actually absorbs, holds on to, and uses what you learn.
Okay, let's start with a number that's, well, it's pretty shocking. The average person forgets nearly 90% of what they read within just 1 week. That's right, 90%. Think about that. All that time and effort you put in, and most of it just vanishes. So look, this isn't just you. It's not a personal failing. It's just how our brains tend to work without a proper system. But here's the good news. It is absolutely a solvable problem. The real question is, how do you break that cycle of reading and forgetting? We're about to walk through the exact steps. So here's our game plan. First, we'll dig into that 90% problem. Then, we'll talk about how to prepare before you even open the book. After that, we'll get into how to read like a detective, make that knowledge actually stick, and finally, how to turn all that reading into real, tangible results. All right, first up, the 90% problem. Let's really get to the bottom of why we forget so much of what we read so we can figure out how to close that gap.
Next, we're going to cover how to prepare before you even start reading. This step is so often overlooked, but it's the absolute foundation for focus and understanding.
This right here, this is probably the single most important question you can ask yourself before you start. Seriously, without a clear why, you're just kind of passively letting words wash over you. But with a why, you turn reading into an active mission to find something specific.
Think of it like this. If your goal is to get better with money, you might pick up Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you want to be more productive, maybe Deep Work. When you line up your book choice with a specific goal, the information just becomes so much more relevant and honestly easier to remember.
Your brain takes all these little cues from your surroundings. If you're in a chaotic environment, you're going to have chaotic thinking. But if you set up a dedicated, quiet, well-lit space, you're basically sending a signal to your brain that says, okay, it's time to focus. It's simple, but it's incredibly powerful. And to keep that focus sharp, you can use something called the Pomodoro technique. It's super easy. You just read with intense focus for 25 minutes, then you take a quick 5-minute break. These little sprints help prevent burnout and keep your concentration levels high.
Okay, so you've prepared your space and your mind. Now it's time to actually read, but we're going to do it like a detective. Let's jump into the active process of really engaging with the text.
A classic but really powerful way to do this is the SQ3R method. First, you survey the chapter. Just skim it to get the lay of the land. Then, you turn the headings into questions. This primes your brain. Then you read with the goal of finding the answers. After, you recite what you learned out loud in your own words. And finally, you review it later to lock it all in.
And this slide really gets to the heart of the difference. A passive reader just wants to get to the last page. An active reader is like an investigator. They're constantly asking, how can I use this? Or what does this mean for me? They use tools like highlighting with intention, not just coloring in the page. It's a total mindset shift.
And let's build on that idea. Intentional note-taking is huge. You could use a simple color system, maybe one for core ideas, another for cool examples. Scribble quick thoughts in the margins, and for those really big aha moments, have a dedicated notebook. What you're doing is building your own personal knowledge library.
Have you ever noticed that little voice in your head that reads along with you? Yeah, that's a real thing. It's called subvocalization. And the thing is, it basically caps your reading speed at your talking speed. To get faster, you can train yourself to see words in chunks instead of one by one, and using your finger to guide your eyes really helps with that. So, you've read actively, you've taken notes? Great! But how do you make sure that knowledge actually sticks around? Let's dive into the art of retention so we can finally beat that 90% forgetting curve.
Okay, the secret weapon here is something called spaced repetition. Instead of cramming, which we all know doesn't work long-term, you review your notes at strategic, increasing intervals. So, you might look at them after one day, then again after a week, and then again after a month. This technique works with your brain to move information into your long-term memory. It's a game changer.
Now for what might be my favorite technique of all, named after the physicist Richard Feynman. It's a really simple test of your understanding. Can you explain a concept you just learned in super simple terms? Like, could you explain it to a kid? If you can't, you probably don't understand it as well as you think you do. It forces you to get to the absolute core of an idea.
And here is a perfect example of the Feynman technique in action.
You take a complex idea, like compound interest, and you turn it into a simple, powerful analogy about a tree growing into a forest. If you can create an explanation like that, you've not only learned the concept, you've mastered it.
You know, they say knowledge is power, but it's really only potential power. So in this last section, let's talk about the most important part, how to turn your reading into actual, real-world results.
When it comes to applying what you've learned, you have to avoid the trap of overwhelm. Don't try to implement 10 new things at once. Instead, pick just one key idea from the entire book. Then, practice just that one thing for a whole week and track how it's going. This focused approach is what creates real, lasting change.
To make reading a real part of your life, you've got to schedule it. Even just 20 minutes a day is a fantastic start. Try something called habit stacking. Just pair your new reading habit with something you already do every day, like having your morning coffee. And remember, motivation comes and goes. Discipline is what keeps you going.
This might just be the most powerful idea of them all. When you stop seeing reading as just a thing you do, and you start seeing it as part of who you are, your behavior naturally starts to follow. You don't have to find time to read anymore. You protect that time because you are a reader.
And that really brings us to this profound thought. The goal isn't just to rack up a high book count to impress people. The real goal is to let the ideas in the right books challenge you, shape you, and ultimately transform who you are.
So, let's make this real, right now. Of all the strategies we've just talked about, reading with purpose, the SQ3R method, the Feynman technique, what is the one thing you are going to put into practice today? Because that transformation we've been talking about, it starts with that single choice.